The film begins by showing two martial arts students, Ryu and Ken, who are training together under their master, Guki. After 13 years of training his two students, Guki secretly begins to prepare to teach Ryu and Ken the Hado technique, the highest fighting style of Ansatsuken. At the edge of a lake near their dojo, Ryu and Ken continue their training until Ken reveals that he is starting to get bored with the training given by Guki, especially since he has not yet taught them the Hado technique. Ryu then asks Ken to be patient, so Ken, who was initially about to leave the dojo, finally agrees to complete his training with Guki. Switching to the past, where Ken's father is seen sending young Ken to Gukin's dojo to learn martial arts because he always got into trouble at school after his mother's death. With Ken's father's company facing problems, Ken was not getting enough attention, so Ken's father decided to entrust him to Guki, whom Ken's father knew well. With Ryu as a peer, Ken quickly adapts to the dojo and begins training together. Returning to the present, Guki calls Ryu and Ken and tells them that they are ready to learn the Hado technique because they have felt the flow of chi within them. Guki then asks them to gather at the dojo after lunch the next day. As Guki instructed, Ryu and Ken are seen waiting for their master at the dojo, but when Guki does not show up, Ryu looks for clues in the room and finds a scroll from him asking his two students to go to a place marked on a map. Without wasting any time, they immediately set out to find their master on foot. After a long journey through valleys and hills, Ryu and Ken arrive at their destination, a dojo where Guki once learned martial arts. They both rest at the dojo, and the next morning, Guki wakes them to pay respects at the grave of his teacher, Gutetsu. In the afternoon, Ken is seen wandering around the dojo and enters a sealed room where he finds a photo of a young Guki and a notebook containing instructions on mastering Satsui no Hado, a forbidden Hado technique. Out of curiosity, Ken decides to take the book. Shortly after, Ryu approaches Ken and joins him in looking around until they find a childhood photo of Guki with his younger brother, Guki, and Gutetsu. On the next occasion, Guki begins teaching his two students the three main techniques of Ansatsuken to produce a deadly Hado: Tatsumaki Zenkakyaku, Shoryuken, and Hadouken. Soon after, Ryu and Ken start practicing the new moves taught by Guki, but they struggle to master them. Seeing this, Guki advises them to continue practicing patiently, explaining that he himself learned Hado after wandering and meeting a martial arts master. When Ken asks if there is another way to master Hado, Guki remains silent, recalling his past when Gutetsu taught him Satsui no Hado, a technique used to kill and destroy enemies. This memory seems to frighten Guki, so he instructs his two students to rest. The following day, Guki resumes training Ryu and Ken by ordering them to fight each other. In the match, they appear evenly matched, but Ryu hesitates to attack Ken, which ultimately causes him to fall. After stopping the fight, Guki demonstrates the deadly power of the Hadouken attack. In the past, Guki and Guki are seen training together with Gutetsu. Since both are deemed unready, Gutetsu states that they are not yet worthy of learning the deadly Satsui no Hado technique. Despite this, Guki feels he is strong enough to learn the technique, which angers Gutetsu, leading him to forbid him from studying it without permission. Returning to the present, after Ken and Ryu finish cleaning the dojo, they notice the name boards of the students in the dojo and question why Guki's name board is turned over, unlike the name boards of the other dojo students. The next day, Ken and Ryu continue training to learn Hado, but Ken appears impatient to master the technique quickly, so Guki punishes him with push-ups. Meanwhile, Ryu, who has managed to produce Hado in his hand, receives additional training from Guki to make it easier for him to channel chi and produce Hado. With Guki's help, Ryu can increase the power of his Hado. After Guki leaves his two students to train independently, Ken also tries to produce Hado in his hand. Unfortunately, his efforts fail until Ken decides to try learning Hado from the book he found. Unexpectedly, Ken succeeds in producing Hado power in a short time. In the dojo, Guki suddenly senses the power of Satsui no Hado from Ken. Worried, Guki immediately calls him to ask where he learned the forbidden technique. Ken admits he learned it from a small book he found in a room. Knowing this, Guki then takes the book and explains that while Satsui no Hado can help them learn Hado quickly, unfortunately, those who study Satsui no Hado will eventually be possessed by an evil spirit. Hearing his master's explanation, Ken promises not to study Satsui no Hado and to keep it hidden from Ryu as Guki wishes. Ken then leaves the room, while Gukin recalls his past when Guki secretly copied the secret technique of Satsui no Hado from Gutetsu's scroll. Apparently, Gukin tried to stop his younger brother, but Guki insisted on learning Satsui no Hado. In the present, the angry Gukin then burns the book containing the Satsui no Hado technique. That night, Gukin tells the story of Gutetsu, who was a direct descendant of the Ansatsuken master and a commander in World War II. After the war, Gutetsu returned to his dojo, which he had entrusted to his uncle, Senso, and his daughter, Sayaka. At that time, Gutetsu decided to take care of Gukin and Guki, who were the children of his friend who died in the war. Since then, Gutetsu made Gukin and Guki his students. Ken and Ryu then become curious about Guki's fate, but Gukin refuses to tell his two students about his younger brother. Gukin even asks them to rest before resuming training the next day. A few days later, Ken's father comes to the dojo to pick up Ken and bring him back to America, but Ken refuses his father's request because he intends to finish his training with Gukin. On that occasion, Ken invites Ryu to train in boxing with his father, who is a professional boxer. Switching to the past, Guki is seen studying Satsui no Hado alone until his body can no longer withstand the technique. On another day, Gukin and Guki are learning calligraphy with Sayaka, who secretly has feelings for Guki. Unfortunately, Guki pays no attention to Sayaka because he is only focused on becoming the strongest by mastering Satsui no Hado. A few days later, Gutetsu instructs his two students to fight so he can observe their progress. In the fight, Guki is unable to match his older brother. After Gutetsu stops the fight and leaves, Guki suddenly attacks Gukin using Satsui no Hado. Fortunately, Gukin is able to dodge the attack and prepares to use his Hadouken to counterattack his younger brother. Sayaka, seeing this, immediately shields Guki and asks Gukin to stop the fight. Gutetsu then calls Guki, who has been studying Satsui no Hado. Despite his master's scolding, Guki remains determined to learn the forbidden technique. When Gukin enters the room, a frustrated Guki reveals that he has learned about an ancestral tradition that only one Ansatsuken master will be chosen per generation. Because of this, Guki wants to become the strongest to face Gukin. Gutetsu becomes even more enraged because he has been trying to abolish this tradition. Since Guki refuses to listen to his master's orders, Gutetsu finally expels him from the dojo. At that moment, Gukin tries to stop his younger brother, but Guki chooses to leave the dojo anyway. Returning to the scene with Ryu and Ken one night, Ryu is seen training Ansatsuken alone while recalling his childhood when he got lost in the forest and was rescued by an old man who then handed him over to Gukin. By releasing all his emotions, Ryu successfully unleashes a powerful Hadouken without realizing that Ken has also arrived at the place. As a result, Ken is knocked unconscious by Ryu's Hadouken. Fortunately, Gukin arrives and manages to save Ken. The next day, while Ryu is fetching water with Ken, he suddenly senses an approaching evil force, prompting Ryu to urge Ken to hurry back to the dojo. Meanwhile, Gukin is visited by Guki, who is transformed into a terrifying figure due to being possessed by the demonic power of Satsui no Hado. Guki has come to challenge Gukin to a fight, but he immediately refuses. At the same time, the voices of Ryu and Ken returning to the dojo are heard, leading Guki to realize that Gukin has two Ansatsuken students. Feeling resentful, Guki intends to kill his two students, prompting Gukin to accept Guki's challenge on the condition that he does not touch Ken and Ryu. In his request, Gukin states he will give a signal when he is ready to fight Guki. After hearing Gukin's explanation, Guki leaves the dojo. Switching to the past when Gutetsu expelled Guki, the Ansatsuken master was angry seeing Guki trying to learn the ultimate technique of Satsui no Hado to the point of coughing up blood. Therefore, Gutetsu asked Guki to leave the dojo immediately. While packing, Guki was approached by Sayaka, who begged him to stay, but Guki remained firm in his decision to leave. As a farewell gesture, Guki finally kissed Sayaka and continued on his way out of the dojo. At that moment, Sayaka gave him some food and a calligraphy scroll with the word heaven written on it as a symbol that she would always encourage the path he chose. After receiving these gifts, Guki began his journey by climbing a cliff until he fainted from exhaustion. Upon waking up, Guki found a large cave, which he then made his home and a place to study Satsui no Hado. On the other hand, Gukin, knowing that Sayaka still harbors feelings for Guki, asks her to start forgetting about his younger brother. 6 months later, In the cave, Guki manages to unleash a powerful Hadouken, but he suddenly collapses because he cannot control the Satsui no Hadu that is starting to consume him. Meanwhile, in the dojo, Gukin asks his master how to master Hadouken without using Satsui no Hadu, where Gutetsu then advises Gukin to find balance within himself. In the cave, after regaining consciousness, Guki realizes that his face has changed due to Satsui no Hadu taking over his body. A year later, Guki has developed a muscular body and a terrifying face, with the ambition to become the strongest person in the world. Sometime later, Gukin finally marries Sayaka after Gutetsu blesses their relationship. At the same time, Guki starts burning all his mementos with Sayaka, including the calligraphy she gifted him. Shortly afterward, Guki begins training to achieve the highest level of Satsui no Hadu, which would make him unbeatable, though the cost might be his life if he cannot withstand the power. One night, having attained the highest level of Satsui no Hadu, Guki confronts Gutetsu to challenge him to a fight. At that moment, they engage in a fierce battle until Guki delivers a final blow that kills Gutetsu. Guki then takes Gutetsu's prayer beads and wears them. When Gukin sees that his master is dead, he challenges Guki to a fight, but he refuses, saying Gukin is far below his level. Since Gutetsu's death, Gukin has been visibly sad and spends his time drinking. Sayaka can no longer tolerate Gukin's behavior and decides to leave him. In the letter she leaves behind, Sayaka asks Gukin to wander and find what he truly wants. Because of this, Gukin finally decides to leave the dojo and begin his journey. Switching to the present, Ryu and Kin are seen training their powers by the lake, where Ryu has managed to produce a Hadouken stronger than Kin's Hadouken. A few days later, Gukin informs his two students that they must undergo the final tradition of the Ansatsuken school by wandering for 3 days and 3 nights before they fight to compete for the title of master. Without wasting time, Ryu and Kin begin their journey and prepare for the final Ansatsuken test by training from morning until night. On the day of the test, Ryu and Kin go to the lakeside to fight. They then exchange attacks until Kin manages to knock Ryu down. Shortly afterward, Ryu gets back up to fight Kin again, but strangely, Ryu seems unconscious and attacks Kin wildly. Unexpectedly, Ryu uses Satsui no Hadu in the fight, which Gukin senses from the dojo. At the same time, Kin starts to realize the use of Satsui no Hadu in the fight after seeing Ryu in pain. Kin then tries to attack Ryu with Hadouken, but it has no effect on him, especially now that his face has become terrifying due to Satsui no Hadu increasingly taking over his body. Seeing Ryu release Hadouken, Kin immediately runs to attack him using the Shoryuken, with flames erupting from his hands. When Gukin arrives at the lakeside, Kin asks his master to help Ryu, who is now unconscious. At the dojo, Gukin immediately treats Ryu and senses a powerful dark Hadu within him that could attract Guki. Realizing that Guki will target Ryu, Gukin orders his two students to leave the dojo, stating that they have completed the final stage of their training. Before his students depart, Gukin meets with Kin and admits that he initially doubted his abilities. However, over time, Kin has demonstrated maturity and wisdom, becoming stronger. During their conversation, they both remain puzzled about how Ryu managed to master Satsui no Hadu, despite the book on the technique being destroyed. Worried that Ryu might go astray again, Gukin asks Kin to protect Ryu. On the day of their departure, Kin and Ryu bid farewell to Gukin, who gives Ryu a belt as a memento. Shortly after Kin and Ryu leave, but Gukin suddenly senses Guki's energy approaching. Before his impending battle with Guki, Gukin asks Senso to leave the dojo, which is no longer safe. At that moment, Gukin thanks Senso for his long service to the school and entrusts him with several books to be given to Kin and Ryu at the appropriate time. After exchanging farewells, Senso leaves the dojo. At the end of the film, Guki arrives at the dojo to fulfill Gukin's promise to fight him. Without wasting any time, the two brothers begin their battle. Moral lesson from the story: remember, patience is like waiting for a bus. You might not see it, but when it comes, you'll be glad you didn't walk. And always listen to your teacher, unless you're training in a haunted dojo.